Well, shalom, shalom. Welcome, welcome, world changers. And thank you again, Hannah, for the beautiful music. That was amazing. That was amazing as always. Thank you for blessing us with your talent. By the way, guys, that is live music, live keyboardistry from our dear Hannah. So beautiful, beautiful stuff. Tonight, we are going to get into the topic of the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. So, share the live stream. Let's get everyone on board. I've heard of we've run across this a number of times throughout throughout recent months and years. So I decided that this would be a very good topic to address, seeing that this is something that comes up every now and then. So I want to make a video, really, just to refer people to, and for you guys as well, to say, hey, check this out, or whatever, if they have any questions regarding this particular topic. I pray that everything that we share here today would be a great blessing to you, increase your knowledge of the scriptures, your knowledge of the things of heaven, your relationship with God, and your knowledge of the truth. Amen, amen, amen. So I may be saying some things that you guys might like. Maybe there's some people out there that may not like what I have to say. Whatever the case is, let's be willing to bring everything to the table, and let's be willing to change our mind if the evidence is strong enough to warrant such a change. Let's be willing to change our mind. Whatever side of the fence or on the fence you are about this topic of the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, let's approach this as best as possible from an unbiased. I know it's almost impossible because I think everyone's got their biases here or there, but as much as possible, approach this with an unbiased and objective point of view. As if, it doesn't really matter what the actual answer to this question is, as long as it's the truth, we'll take it. As long as it's the truth, we will take it. Okay, so welcome, guys. Welcome over there on TikTok. Lionel, Mama Tuning, Phoenix again. Welcome, Sean, Malamute Life. All right, notification joined. Vicky, some of these screen names, I'm not even going to try to pronounce them. So, yeah, all right. On YouTube, we have Going Nowhere. It says top of the night to you. All right, welcome. Good. It's good to see you here, Going Nowhere, and it's good that you're here, and it's good that you're going nowhere. So, blessings to you and yours. Chipmunk says shalom, everyone. JR says shalom, y'all. Qbert says shalom. We have Piawete, excuse me. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name, says shalom. All right, so shalom, y'all. Blessings to you and your families. Good to see y'all. And JR, yeah, no problem, JR. That's fine. This is something that is due to talk about, regardless of anything else here. So seeing that this is a topic that comes up every once in a while, we're going to talk about this. So thank you. Blessings. Piaweti says, translation, be reasonable. Very good. Yeah, be reasonable. Very good stuff. Very important. Reasonable. Digital, good to see you back. Says, grace and peace to you, brother. Greetings, everyone. Grace and peace multiplied back to you as well. Blessings. All right. Yeah. Tonight, the topic of the night is Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. JR says, yep, if it gets us closer to God, that's more important than Greek, Syriac, Latin, or Hebrew. Yeah, that's right. Going Nowhere says, always read the New Testament. I always read the New Testament was written in Greek. Correct me if I'm wrong. Well, we're going to talk about that Going Nowhere here tonight. I'm going to do this live stream in a little bit of a different format tonight, as per usual. Seek the Lord says shalom. Seek the Lord is kind of, sometimes it's, don't want you to get lost in the shuffle there, but shalom, blessings and peace multiplied to you and your family. Good to see you there. Chipmunk says, So relaxing, Hannah. Yeah, thank you. On behalf of Hannah, thank you, Chipmunk. All right, guys. Blessings, blessings, blessings. All right. Yeah, this is a topic that has garnered attention over the past few decades. We'll talk about this as well. Like, why is it that, since perhaps maybe the 80s or so, this has been gaining traction? Yeah, so we'll talk about the history of all this. Sean, welcome again. LeBlanc, 31, over there on TikTok. I am live, by the way, on multiple platforms at once. I'm live on Rumble. I'm live on TikTok, YouTube. I'm trying to think now. DLive, Twitch, BitChute. I can see the live chat on YouTube and on TikTok, but the other ones are kind of touch and go. If you're on another platform and I don't respond to you, my apologies. If all else fails, just go over to YouTube or TikTok. Look me up over there, Christopher Enoch, and you'll find that I'm live right now. Regina says, I got my TV and phone on live stream at the same time. My phone watching ads and not being skipped during live stream. My support to all your hard work and research to guide us in our walk. Well, thank you very much, Regina. I appreciate that. Okay, so a little bit of a different format tonight. So I've got more of a presentation tonight as opposed to, normally it's just a sit around the table kind of casual. It's going to be a little bit more formal tonight, okay? You guys will see. I got slides prepared and such. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these slides. We're going to talk about it. And then afterwards, I will jump in the live chat. Normally what I do is, as you guys know, normally what I do is I kind of go back and forth between the live chat and the actual flow of the night, the actual agenda of the night. I go back and forth, and I do that just to, keep the pace and keep up with everything, and just to stay on top of everything, and just so you guys know that I'm there and responding as fast as possible. But tonight is going to be different. I have a little bit of a presentation with slides, so I'm going to go through those slides. I'm going to talk about that, and then I'm going to come into the live chat and respond to your questions and your comments. Once again, last call, guys. The topic of the night is the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. Share the live stream. Let's get others on board. All right. Okay. So, this is very rarely do I ever do slides like this, but hopefully all goes well. If it doesn't, please be patient and please understand that this is not the typical flow of the night. Joseph, welcome and blessings. Okay, so here we go. Now, once again, I'll get to the live chat after. So what I'm going to do here is you guys can chat amongst yourselves for a little bit if you wish. That's not a problem. In fact, I encourage that. However, as far as I'm concerned, I'm going to do the presentation first, then I'll jump in the live chat. All right, so here it is. Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, a closer look. All right. The question is, where did this thing come from? When was it first? What's the first pieces of evidence, or what's the first time that somebody ever spoke about this? And here we see the origins of the concept of the Gospel of Matthew. So there's this church father by the name of Papias, and he wrote Matthew set sayings in order in a Hebrew dialect. Papias wrote in the early 2nd century, and each interpreted them as he was able. And that is found in Eusebius Historia Ecclesiastica 3:39. And this was written around 130 AD. So, again, just to keep this as step by step, we have the first mention, the first glimpse of the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew started with Papias. Give me a second, guys. And that's very important to understand, I do believe. Just give me a second, guys. Yeah, this is live here, so I just wanted to make sure everything's in order. So it's important to understand that the first mention, or the first time this ever is brought to our attention, is through Papias, one of the early church fathers, at around 130 A.D. Okay. The second time in history we have Irenaeus, and he quotes saying, Matthew also issued a written gospel among the Hebrews in their own dialect, while Peter and Paul were preaching at Rome and laying the foundations of the church. And he wrote that in Irenaeus Against Heresies 3.1. This was around 182 to 188 AD. After that, we have Tertullian saying, among the four Gospels, which are the only indisputable ones in the Church of God under heaven, I have learned by tradition, key words there, I have learned by tradition that the first was written by Matthew, who was once a publican, but afterwards an apostle of Jesus Christ, and it was prepared for the converts from Judaism and published in the Hebrew language, and that is written in Tertullian Against Marcion, in Eusebius' account of it in 6.25.4, which would have been into the 3rd century at 208 AD. So here's the question: how did they know? How did Papias know? How did Irenaeus know? How did Tertullian know these things? We'll talk about it. Papias spoke of Matthew only once. One single sentence in his entire bibliography. So, many scholars would say that he probably didn't know much about Matthew, or maybe he was just mistaken. Why so little info? Why is it that Papias, out of all the things that we have from him, out of all the writings and all the sayings that we have passed down from Papias, of all the stuff, only one little thing he mentioned about Matthew? Why? Why is that? Did he not know much about Matthew? Maybe he didn't. Think about it. It's like it's just about 130 AD, or even around there, like some 50 years or less after the author of Matthew wrote Matthew. So perhaps very little was known about it because he didn't say much about it, or perhaps he made a mistake. Just because somebody in the 2nd century, a church leader, says something doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. He didn't bring any evidence to the table. He didn't say, well, I have a copy of it. He didn't say, well, he didn't present any good evidence other than just making a statement. Matthew wrote it. Matthew wrote of the logia or logion of Yeshua in the Hebrew dialect. Okay, so here's another question. So subsequent church fathers do not provide source references. So people like Irenaeus and Tertullian, they don't provide much information either. They don't give any sources. Like, okay, like other than just, just saying that, like Tertullian, I've learned by tradition. Okay, so does that tradition have to be true? Here's another thing. The fathers did not claim to have a copy of the actual Hebrew text, as far as I know. And then we have Eusebius, who recorded having learned by tradition. Having learned by tradition. What tradition? Is this like a textbook Sunday school style lesson? Like as if Tertullian or Irenaeus and these other ones that have came after Papias to say, well, this is what we know about Matthew. How? Via Papias? It seems like he was just passing on the info that most likely originated from Papias. So Papias started this whole, like Papias started it, and then Irenaeus picked it up and then kind of, it goes down, it goes through the grapevine, right? Irenaeus picks it up and then he repeats what he got from Papias. And then Tertullian repeats what was handed down, as they even said, by tradition. So what was this? I'm asking questions. Was this just a rumor gone wild? Let's go back to Papias and take a look. Papias said that Hebrews set in order the sayings of Jesus in the Hebrew dialect. So the Greek there that Papias it's using there is the logia or the logion, meaning the sayings or the oracles of Jesus, the sayings of Jesus. So a collection of sayings or oracles of Jesus is not a gospel. The Gospel of Thomas is a good example of a collection of sayings. Let's just go over, take a peek at for example, Gospel of Thomas. Give me a second here, guys. So here is the Gospel of Thomas. Right here. This is a collection of sayings. You see, like Gospel of Thomas 1, and he said, whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death. Number 2, Jesus said, quote, unquote. Number 3, Jesus said, quote, unquote. Number 4, Jesus said, quote, unquote. Number 5, Jesus said, quote, unquote. And then number 6, his disciples questioned him and said, so this is an example of what sayings of Jesus would be, of the sayings of Yeshua would be. Number 7, Jesus said, blessed is the lion, yada, 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 unquote. Number 8, and he said, quote, sayings, the logia, would be like something like the Gospel of Thomas, but that's not what we find in the Gospel of Matthew. So the question remains, what are these sayings? What did Papias mean by the logia, the oracles of Jesus? Was he talking about the gospel as we know it, like the Gospel of Matthew as we know it? Why would he call it the sayings of Jesus, as if it's like the Gospel of Thomas? Another question, And again, we got to use some good critical thinking here. What does Hebrew dialect mean? So there's a lot of discussion. A lot of discussion as to what Papias actually meant. What did he mean by Hebrew dialect? Is he talking about that maybe in the Gospel of Matthew that he records a lot of the Hebrew or Aramaic, especially dialect of Yeshua? In fact, he does record the most. Maybe Papias is talking about that. When Papias said that Matthew recorded the sayings, set in order the sayings of Yeshua in the Hebrew dialect, did he mean something else? Did he mean it was that Matthew is simply more Jewish? Because the word Hebrew is synonymous in many places with Jewish. So Hebrew dialect, would that mean that Matthew is a little bit more along the Hebrew line of communication, which actually the Gospel of Matthew as we know it today in the Greek it's more Jewish than any of the other books. Is that what Papias meant? So there's lots of questions here. What did Papias mean here? Was it Aramaic or was it Hebrew? Or can we use these interchangeably? Could it mean that the Gospel of Matthew, as what we have today in the Greek, records more Hebrew or Aramaic sayings than any of the other Gospels, which I do believe that is the case? Could it just mean that the Gospel of Matthew contains the most Hebrew or Aramaic? Is this what Papias means? So the Gospel of Matthew is reportedly the most Hebrew or Aramaic than compared to any of the other Gospels. For example, we have in Matthew chapter 9, verse 25, Talitha Kumi, meaning, little girl, I say to you, arise. Okay? Now keep in mind and check this out as well, that Matthew, and I'll call him Matthew here. I know that the authorship of the Gospel of Matthew is debatable, and most credible scholars would say it's certainly not Matthew from the one of the 12 disciples. Whatever the case is, I'll just call him Matthew just for the sake of conventional speak right now. So then we have again, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Now keep in mind as well, this is Matthew chapter 27, verse 46. Matthew, as we know it, the conventional Matthew translated from Greek, puts both the Aramaic, and this is Aramaic, by the way, guys, and the translation together. That would not happen if our Greek Matthew was translated from an original Hebrew Matthew. It would not. It makes that just wouldn't happen. It just wouldn't work that way. You just don't translate a thing like that, especially a good literal translation. Another point here is Abba, Father, used in Matthew 26 verse 39 and in verse 42. Number 4, Maranatha, O Lord, our Lord, come, used in 1 Corinthians 16:22, but also referenced in Matthew. Number 5, Ephratha, be opened, used in Mark 7:34, but in Matthew 15:30 as well. Or Matthew 15:30 may reflect this saying. Raka, you fool, Matthew 5:22. Number 7, Korban, in the Aramaic, a gift dedicated to God, Matthew 15:5. Number 8, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. Okay, this is what we were talking about here, the variation of what we read earlier. And again, Abba, same thing. Abba, variation of what we read earlier, and then Talitha Kumi as well. So it seems like Matthew has more of a Hebrew/Jewish mindset or flavor to it, as well as all of these different sayings that Matthew brings out in the Aramaic. So is that what Papias meant? What did Papias mean when he said that? Because again, we want to focus a little bit on Papias because he was the first one to bring this out on the table. And what he actually said and what he actually meant is an object of great controversy. Even scholars today argue what exactly does Hebrew dialect mean? What exactly does logia mean? Logion. What does that mean? So whatever Papias meant, whether he was talking about a gospel of Matthew, even though he didn't say gospel, he said the sayings of logia. Was he talking about a gospel of Matthew that was written in Hebrew, entirely in Hebrew? Well, let's take a look at some of the versions of such a text that we can find today. Versions of the Hebrew Matthew. Deutele. The Deutele Hebrew Gospel of Matthew is a version of the Gospel of Matthew that was published in 1555 by Jean Deutele. Deutele claimed to have found this Hebrew manuscript among the Jews of Rome. The text was included in a bound volume from the 1550s that also contained various Hebrew, Latin, and Greek texts. Well, this is pretty recent. I mean, all things considered. I know it's like almost 500 years ago, but still, I mean, all things considered, it's pretty recent. It's not like this was found. It's not like this is a text that dates back to, the 1st or 2nd century or anything like that. You know that here on this channel, we focus mainly on that kind of thing, 1st and 2nd century, or especially 1st century, because once you get into the 2nd century, then things get a little bit, quite off, by the way. But this is way beyond. This is way newer than any of that. And I know it says here, Deutele claims that it was from an older version of it, but that text does not exist. Okay, so this is from the 16th century. That's pretty new. Another version of the Hebrew Matthew is it's called Munster by Sebastian Munster, a renowned German cartographer and cosmographer, published a Hebrew translation of the Gospel of Matthew in 1537. So it's still in the 16th century. Like, we're way down the pike here. It says his translation was notable for being one of the early attempts to make the gospel accessible to Hebrew-speaking audiences. Munster's work was part of a broader effort during the Renaissance to translate and disseminate religious texts into various languages. I think it's also very important, folks, to understand that Deutele and Munster is vastly considered to be not really the original Hebrew, but rather a translation from the Greek into Hebrew. And we see this as well, like I don't have it here on the slides, but we see this as well in a translation by Delitzsch. Delitzsch as well has the whole Hebrew New Testament. Okay. Moving on, another version of the Hebrew Matthew, the Catalonia, The Catalonia Hebrew Matthew refers to a medieval Hebrew manuscript of the Gospel of Matthew that was discovered in the region of Catalonia, Spain. This manuscript is part of a collection known as the Hebrew Gospels from Sepharad, which includes several Hebrew manuscripts of the Gospel. So once again, this is nothing really that old per se. I mean, when I say old or ancient, or I'm talking about somewhere around the 1st century. Okay, this is nowhere near that. This is quite new, quite recent, all things considered. Finally, and this is what we want to zone in on here, because this is what has been causing bringing a lot of attention in recent days, and that is the Shem Tov, or Shem Tob. It's spelt as Shemtov or Shemtob. It can be both ways, Tov or Tob. I'm going to refer to it as Tov for the most part. This particular Hebrew Matthew was written by Isaac ben Shaprut, or otherwise known as Ibn Shaprut, a Spanish Jewish rabbi who lived in the late 14th century. So we're a little bit older now. It's going back a little bit more in time, but still not near what we want to see. Keep in mind, the newer a manuscript is, it's much more likely for that manuscript to have suffered tremendous corruption through the transmission of the text. The reason being is because they had no machines, computers, cameras back in those days, cell phones, whatever the case. They had none of these, and photocopier machines. They had nothing like this. Printing press, no. So it all had to be translated by hand. And when you translate by hand, well, a lot of times you don't even know who actually transmitted it to you. And for the most part, we just don't know most of it. And it's just so subjective, or what's the right word? It's subject to corruption, both by mistake and on purpose. For these scribes to change things in the text. So the newer a manuscript is, the more likely it has been changed and corrupted throughout the ages. Because it could have had who knows, like 100 different scribes that that copied it throughout the ages. So you'd have like the original text, and then you'd have one scribe copy the original text and make mistakes. Hey, humans are humans; they make mistakes, right? And then sometime down the road a little bit, another scribe would borrow the copy from the scribe, and he would copy the mistakes that the scribe made, and the interpolations and manipulations that scribe may have made. He would copy that and make his own mistakes and or manipulations of the text. And then the third scribe, the third generation, would come around, and the same thing could happen. He could borrow from the second generation and say, can I borrow? I want to make a copy. I'll take my quill and I'll make a copy of it. And he would copy all of the variants, both intentional and unintentional variants from the first scribe, compounded by the second scribe, and then he'd make his own. And so by the time you get to 100, like, the chances of it being perfect is virtually zero, zip, not like nada. It's not going to be. And like, you think about, I remember back in school when the teacher had the whole class. There was like 25 of the children, and we all stood in a circle, and the teacher whispered a few sentences in the first to the first child, and the instructions were to relay the saying, the short little story, as accurately as possible, as much as you possibly can, accurately as possible, to the next person, and then that person to the next person, and that to the next person. By the time you get through just 20 of them, it's like a completely, totally different story. So we're kind of like doing a literary telephone game here sometimes, okay? So we got to keep that in mind. So again, down here at the bottom, the last point, the Shemtov or Shemtov, Hebrew Matthew, written by Ibn Shaprut, a Spanish Jewish rabbi who lived in the late 14th century. He included this Hebrew version of the Gospel of Matthew in his anti-Christian polemical work, Ebn Bohan. It's called The Touchstone, and it was completed around 1380. The Ebn Bohan was written to help rabbis debate against Christianity. So Ibn Shaprut had a whole, he wrote a whole volume of work to help his fellow rabbis because he was a non-Messianic rabbi, to help his fellow rabbis, his fellow Jews, debate Christians. And within that work, the Ibn Bohan, he included the Hebrew Matthew, which is now known as Shem Tov, the Shem Tov version of that. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about Shem Tov. Some believe that the Shem Tov text is a faithful representation of the original Hebrew Matthew. Shem Tov contains significant differences in doctrine and theology as compared to other Hebrew versions of Matthew, and may I add, even significant differences in doctrine and theology as compared to the typical Greek Matthew as well. Moving on, the Shem Tov Hebrew Matthew was brought to prominence by a gentleman by the name of Mr. George Howard through his influential writings over the past few decades. George Howard is the one who really popularized this idea, this whole thing about the Hebrew Matthew based on Shem Tov. So let's talk about Mr. Howard here for a moment, because Mr. Howard is kind of like the father of the Shem Tov Hebrew Matthew prominence of today. He's one of the main, if not the main, propagator of the Hebrew Matthew today. You may know of some popular Hebrew or Messianic leaders that would put a lot of faith in the Hebrew Matthew. Well, it's quite likely what they're doing here is they're putting a lot of faith in George Howard's version of the Shem Tov. But let's see what George Howard has to say himself about this work. It's important, very important. Excuse me. It's very important to look at the actual source. Like, for example, a lot of people, they have their favorite version of the Bible, like King James only people or something like that, but they never really read the translator's preface. It's like, well, let's see what the translators have to say themselves about themselves and about the work that they did. Why just project perfection upon it? Why assume that it's just perfect, ipso facto perfection, like a gift from God, if the translators themselves don't say, if they never claim that? Why make an idol out of it when the actual source of that information doesn't propagate that kind of an idea? So, George Howard. Let's see what George Howard. And by the way, guys, giving credit where credit's due, some of this information that I'm referring to tonight is from a dear gentleman, Rabbi Trim. Rabbi Trim, you can look him up. Perhaps, Lord willing, I'll put a link to his YouTube channel on my YouTube video here a little bit in just a little while here. But Rabbi Trim has got a wonderful exposition about this whole thing. There are a lot of people who basically would stake their soul upon the works of Mr. Howard here. A lot of people some I should say, we don't want to believe something just because we want to. We don't want to say it's true just because we want to believe it. Let's believe it because it's true, whether we like it or not. Whether it confirms what we want to believe or whether it denies what we want to believe. This is one of the fallacies, this is one of the biases, right? The confirmation bias. Let's not engage in this confirmation bias. Let's look at it for what it really is. What is it? What is this Shem Tov, George Howard's version of this particular Hebrew Matthew? What is it really? What did Mr. Howard say himself about it? Let's look at the actual source. George Howard said, well, first of all, George Howard believed that certain linguistic and sociological contexts of early Christianity, along with certain theological elements of Shem Tov's Matthew, suggest that Shem Tov may have served as a basis for the Greek foundation, or for the Greek version. However, he also said, now, okay, so we should get that out of the way. Mr. Howard did believe that Shem Tov was kind of like the foundation of the Hebrew Greek. Or excuse me, the Matthew, Greek version of Matthew. So Mr. Howard did believe that Shem Tov was like fairly, I'll let him explain it in his own words, but he did believe that the Shem Tov version of the Hebrew Matthew served as a basis for our Greek Matthew. So we have to consider that. But what did he say about this Shem Tov and the Hebrew Matthew? He said, and I quote, this is a quote right from Howard's book. He said, an old substratum to the Hebrew in Shem Tov is a prior composition, not a translation. The old substratum, however, has been exposed to a series of revisions so that the present text of the Shem Tov represents the original only in an impure form. Only in an impure form. And you can find that in the book called The Gospel of Matthew According to a Primitive Hebrew Text, printed in 1987, page 223. Mr. Howard also said Shem Tov's Matthew does not, look at that word not, does not preserve the original in a pure form. Do you hear that, Howard fanboys? Do you hear that? It does not. It's what he said. It does not preserve the original in a pure form. It reflects, he goes on to say, it reflects contamination by Jewish scribes during the Middle Ages. Like, this is nowhere near the time of quote unquote Matthew. It says, he said, considerable parts of the original, however, appear to remain. Okay, so he's saying right here is there's a lot of impurity. There's, it does not preserve the original, but it has a fair amount of original in it. That's basically what he's saying. That's what he's saying. And that's what he wrote in Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, 1995, page 178. So he's admitting here, in no uncertain terms, that the Shem Tov is not pure, is not to be trusted as an original. This is what he said himself. Okay. Now, there's more. There's more to where that came from. And again, props to and thank you, Rabbi Trim, for some of this information. This is great stuff. Shem Tov's relation to Deutele. Okay. Now, you say, Christopher, what's this have to do with anything? Well, Deutele is another version of the Hebrew Matthew, which aligns fairly well with the Greek Matthew, to the point where it's like, it's a translation of the Greek. It's like the Greek translated to Hebrew Deutele. Okay, we must understand this. So the title here, in and of itself, should raise some eyebrows, because this is Shem Tov's relation to Deutele. So here I'm going to present several, a good dozen passages in which the Shem Tov manuscript pretty well matches Deutele, meaning that there is a relationship between Shem Tov and Deutele. There's a relationship between this Hebrew Matthew Deutele that was translated from the Greek and Shem Tov. So it's like, okay, so if Shem Tov was the original Hebrew, the first Gospel of Matthew, then you wouldn't see these kind of things in it. That's the point. The point is, if you look at this from an academic or scholarly perspective, you will realize that if Shem Tov was what it purports to be, or what a lot of people make it out to be, you would not see what I'm about to show you right now. And by the way, they're not telling you this. They're not telling you this. They're not telling you what I'm telling you tonight. They're not reading the stuff from Howard or from Howard's book that I read just a few minutes ago. They're not going to show you what I'm just going to show you here. So Matthew 1:1 in the Shem Tov, it says, "These are the generations of Yeshu, ben David, ben Avraham." Deutele also uses the term Yeshu. Coincidence? You be the judge. Could it be that Shem Tov, whoever's behind it, wasn't original, but they kind of used Deutele as a little bit of a template? Could it be? Oh, but there's a lot more where this came from. Matthew 1:19, just 18 verses later, Shem Tov says, "Or to bind her over to death," speaking about the woman who was bound by Satan or delivered. Deutele says, "Or deliver her up to death." In parentheses, there is a likely scribal error between Deutele, to deliver up, and Shem Tov, to bind her over. And you see that these two Hebrew words are similar. Matthew 2:12, the Shem Tov, represented by ST, and the Deutele would be DT. ST says, "by the angel," speaking about the dream that Joseph had, and the DT said the angel. Now again, in the Greek Matthew, we don't have anything about the angel. Is this just a coincidence? The Deutele, that's purportedly translated from the Greek, says the angel, but the Shem Tov does too. Where do they get that from? Again, another 10 verses after that, Shem Tov says, "to the land of Gilgal," as the Deutele says, "to the land of Galil." Right? So again, very, very similar. The next verse, Shem Tov says, "he shall be called Nazareth." Deutele says, "he shall be called Nazareth." Oh, I wonder where they got that from. And by the way, the Shem Tov's Hebrew in that one verse, in that one word Nazareth, is a European Hebrew. It's not the ancient Hebrew. Take note. Matthew 3:11, Shem Tov says the fire of the Holy Spirit. You know the whole thing about be baptized by the Holy Spirit and fire. Well, Shem Tov says the fire of the Holy Spirit. And guess what? Deutele also says the fire of the Holy Spirit. What's going on here? Matthew 6:16, Shem Tov says they have already received their reward, and Deutele says they have already received their rewards. Right. Okay. Is this coincidence? Matthew 8:21, Shem Tov says one of the disciples, and Deutele says one of his disciples. So they say the exact same thing. Shem Tov, one of his disciples. Deutele, one of his disciples. Compare that with the Greek, another disciple. So what's up with this? You catching this, guys? Matthew 10, verse 2 and 3. Shem Tov says Philip and Bartholomew, James and John. And the Dutele also says the exact same thing. Verse 5, Matthew 10:5, cities of the Samaritans. And the Dutele says the exact same thing. Matthew 14:21, Shem Tov says the number of people of those who ate, and the Dutele says the exact same thing. This doesn't happen, folks, by accident. If you don't catch it right, if you don't catch it by now, there should be 1,000 red flags that pop up, especially in regards to the Shem Tov manuscript. Should be 1,000 red flags that are waving right now in your mind, in your heart, in your spirit, in your soul. But there's more where that came from, more Shem Tov corruption. Considering the date of this manuscript, the transmission of the text is of utmost concern. We just described this. So if Shem Tov, if we have a manuscript from, even if it's the 2nd century, I prefer 1st century, but even if it's from the 2nd century, then it's still, we still got to put it through the test. You still got to put it through the ringer. We're not going to just accept it because a couple guys behind a desk are just rattling off about it. We're not just going to accept it because, people want you to accept it. If it's from the 1st century, that's even better. But this is from the 14th century? You gotta be kidding me. So the date of this manuscript is of utmost concern. We saw on the previous slide how sections of the Shem Tov conformed to Greek and Latin versions. Oh, but that is somehow supposed to be the original Hebrew. Really. The text was corrupted by, quote-unquote, another language. You can see Matthew 2, verse 11. An example of that is they brought to him myrrh, and in the Shem Tov, it's called mira. It's another language. And we find that also in chapter 3, verse 7, chapter 4, verse 10, chapter 4, verse 13, chapter 4, verse 21, chapter 4, verse 23. Chapter 5, verse 31, chapter 6, verse 2, verse 28, verse 30, chapter 8, verse 6, verse 28, chapter 9, verse 2, verse 9, chapter 11, verse 21, chapter 12, verse 4, chapter 12, verse 42, chapter 13, verse 25, chapter 16, verse 13, chapter 16, verse 16, chapter 17, verse 1, chapter 23, verse 5, chapter 24, verse 14, chapter 26, verse 13, chapter 27, verse 33. Don't let anybody tell you, or don't let anybody even imply that their Shem Tov mingled, mixed version of the Hebrew Matthew is perfect by any means. Don't let anybody dupe you into thinking that because of people who are suffering from this confirmation bias, and there is a gentleman, I'm not going to name any names here, but there is a gentleman out there that's well known in these circles that is a person that wants to believe something like this because it's confirmation bias. He wants to. He wants something to confirm what he wants to believe. So you just suck it up, and he wants everybody else to suck it up without actually doing the research. Not only that, but there's many proper nouns in Shem Tov that has been changed to European forms. For example, the Greek, and he shall be called Nazarene. Shem Tov says he shall be called Nazareth. Dutele says he shall be called Nazareth as well. But the spelling of Shem Tov is Europeanized. You're telling me this is the original Hebrew? You're joking, right? Also, Shem Tov revised some of the vocabulary to later Hebrew dialects, such as the Mishnaic Hebrew. For example, in Matthew 4:17, Greek, repent in the Shem Tov, turn you in repentance, and the Dutele, turn you in repentance. The spelling here and the Hebrew word is more of a Mishnaic word. Now, I'm going to touch on, there's a document out there floating around called the Original Gospel of Matthew. The title in and of itself should tell you everything. Because there is no original Matthew. Whether it's Greek or Hebrew, there is no original Matthew. There's no such thing. I don't care what language you want it. There's no such thing as an original Matthew. We don't have the original of any of the books. All we have is just later manuscripts and transmission and variants galore. You say there are more variations in the New Testament manuscripts than there are words of the New Testament. Like, wow. So there's no... Who claims to have any original of any of the New Testament books, let alone, say the Gospel of Matthew? The name itself here of this book should tell you everything. The name itself is simply not true. If you interpret the word original as being the original, like this is actually what Matthew actually wrote, or this is like somewhere even close to perfection of what Matthew wrote. Not even. Okay, so I'm restrained I'm not going to quote too much of this book, but this is what we have here in volume 3, page 1. It says this volume is our best estimation of the likely original. Okay. Well, appreciate the honesty there. It's the best estimation. I'm not going to put any trust in an estimation of a likely original. I'm not going to use it for arguing. I'm not going to use it for scholarly works. I'm not going to use it to quote in any kind of debate, like unless I have evidence, and there's very rare circumstances would I ever do that. But the one who is responsible for this document says, in his own words, it's just an estimation. It's our best estimation, he says, of the likely original. Now, in another volume of this book, it says, and this is what the actual author of this book says, Eusebius, a famous church historian in 325 AD, still positively mentions the Gospel, the Hebrew Matthew. Eusebius mentions it in context of speaking about the validity of John's book of Revelation. Eusebius said some in the church class Revelation among the accepted books of the New Testament, the NT. So what the author of this book is saying, what the author of this book is saying is that Eusebius is purporting that this book is just as authoritative as Revelation. That's what he's saying here. That's what I get this to mean. Okay, so the person who is behind this OMG, or OGM, it should be, the Original Gospel of Matthew, OMG, OGM, he's saying that Eusebius mentions it in the context of speaking about the validity of John's book of Revelation. And Eusebius said some of the church class of Revelation among the accepted books of the New Testament. So what he's saying here is that Eusebius, in his work Church History 325, 4-5, that he is saying that the original gospel of the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew is just as canonical as the book of Revelation, just as it, quote unquote, accepted. But let's read it, because I pity those who read stuff like this without actually checking it with some good critical thinking skills. Because this is the first, just the first footnote in this book, in this particular book, the first footnote. And this is what he said. And by the way, guys, that quote that I just mentioned there is found in volume 1, excuse me, page 1 and 2. But let's go to the actual text that this guy's referring to. We'll see what exactly it says, in the context of what it says, what Eusebius actually said, and how he actually portrayed it. Okay, so here I am at the text. I'm reading from newadvent.org here, the text that author was referring to. It says, among the rejected writings must be reckoned also the Acts of Paul, and the so-called shepherd, that would be the shepherd of Hermas, and the Apocalypse of Peter. And in addition to these extant the Epistle of Barnabas and the so-called teachings of the apostles, and besides, as I said, the Apocalypse of John, if it seemed proper, which some, as I said, reject, but which others class with the accepted books. Among these, some have placed also the gospel according to the Hebrews, with which those of the Hebrews that have accepted Christ are especially delighted. And all these may be reckoned among the disputed books. Well, this is what. So here's the thing. There's a question, a couple questions here. So that OMG work that I just had up on the screen purported that this right here is Eusebius saying that the Hebrew Matthew is just as acceptable as Revelation. Do you get that from that, guys? When you read this, do you get that from that? He talks about, why didn't the OGM quote the Acts of Paul? Why didn't it reference the Shepherd of Hermas, or the Apocalypse of Peter, or the Epistle of Barnabas, or the teachings of the apostles? Why does it have to talk about just the Apocalypse of John? So when I read this, first of all, Eusebius says the gospel according to the Hebrews. But how do you know that's the Shem Tov or any other Hebrew version of Matthew? It doesn't. How do you know? It's a question, honest question. How do you know? This could be talking about any other gospel according to the Hebrews. Could be anything. But how do you know? This is talking about the same thing that all the other Hebrew roots Messianic people would be talking about in regards to the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. It just says gospel according to Hebrews. Okay? But it puts it also in the context of the Acts of Paul, and I don't think anybody would consider the Acts of Paul to be canonical. The Shepherd of Hermas, I love it, okay? The Apocalypse of Peter, the same thing. The Epistle of Barnabas, the same thing. The teachings of the apostles, that would probably be the Didache, and the Apocalypse of John. But you notice he kind of shifts his wording here when he gets to the Apocalypse of John. But then he says, among these, some have placed also the gospel according to the Hebrews, with which those of the Hebrews that have accepted Christ are especially delighted. and all these may be reckoned among the disputed books. So when you read that, I mean, be honest. When you read that, do you go, oh, yeah, sure, I know for sure this is talking about the Shem Tov, or the Hebrew according to Matthew, or the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. I know this is talking about the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, and I know it's just as canonical as another book in the Bible. Is that what you get from this? Or do you get it? Or do you get that this book, whatever this gospel according to the Hebrews is disputed, along with all these other ones, the Acts of Paul, the Apocalypse of Peter, the Epistle of Barnabas, and yada, yada, yada. I said that to say this. Back to the slide screen, the slide here. Okay, so I read the Eusebius Church History 325, 4-5. So here's the question. Did this OGM, represent it properly? Now, don't just say yes if you're saying yes because you want to believe that. Be honest. Like, if you give this to somebody who has no clue, you give this to just the old Auntie Jane sitting in a church pew, somewheres in California right now, or whatever the case is, some old little nanny sitting there, and you say, hey, read this, Eusebius 325, 4 and 5. She reads it. Oh yeah, there's a bunch of books that who knows what the authenticity of these books are. And then you ask her, so this quote unquote gospel according to the Hebrews, do you get that this is canonical or anywhere near it? Truth be told, I think that most people would say, oh, absolutely not. Not any more canonical than the Acts of Peter or the Apocalypse, the Acts of Paul, the Apocalypse of Peter, or any of these other ones like this. So Eusebius continued and said that among these, that is, the accepted books of the New Testament, some have placed also the gospel according to the Hebrews, written by Matthew. In that passage, therefore, Eusebius recognized that some gave as much authority to the gospel according to the Hebrews by Matthew as was to John's revelation. So that's what this person said in the text. In the OGM, the so-called original gospel of Matthew, he said that Eusebius recognized that some gave as much authority to the gospel according to the Hebrews by Matthew as was given to John's revelation. So yeah, the question remains, is this a faithful representation of what Eusebius actually said? Just a question. I'll get to you guys in just a moment in the live chat. When I first heard about this, the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, of course, super interested in it. Now, especially some of the things that it says in there. I didn't say anything right away because I don't want to say anything without evidence. But the first thing that came to my mind is the Ebionites have something to do with this. And the Ebionites are far from truth. I call them the Ebionite cult. So this whole thing about, especially, Shem Tov and all this kind of stuff, smells like the fruit of the Ebionite cult. And this is some of the reasons, some of the points why I would say that. Ebionites believed in the gospel of Matthew and Matthew alone. Therefore, they would be prone to manipulate the text to make it more consistent. So some people argue that, the Hebrew Matthew is more consistent. well, that just proves that they were messing with it more than anything else, because it's a paleographical and historical fact. Scholars would tell you this, that the original of all these books are usually the most prone to error. And as scribes come along later on, they take it and they go, oh, well, I'll fix that up. I'll fix that up. I'll fix that up. So really the more, quote unquote, consistent or the smoother books are typically the manipulated books later on, not the originals. So the fact that the Ebionites accepted only the Gospel of Matthew, and the fact that Shem Tov has suffered from so many revisions and variants and layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of corruption doesn't surprise me, because the Ebionites and anyone like them would be prone to, they'd be predisposed. It would be their predisposition to take that, their only idol, and make it as perfect as possible, make it as consistent as possible, change the text, manipulate the text. I can take the Gospel of John and I can change it a lot. I can change it a lot to make it more consistent. But does that mean that my changed Gospel of John is the original? Of course not. I've heard a couple guys say, oh yeah, the Hebrew Matthew, the Shem Tov, it makes more sense than the Greek Matthew. It's more consistent. It doesn't have the contradictions that the Greek Matthew has. So it has to be true. I'm like, when I heard that, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me, man. What, you can't think, you don't have the capacity to understand that somebody can take it, and more likely that they did take it and manipulate it to make it more smooth, to make it more consistent, to take the contradictions out of it, to propagate their doctrine more. It's a theological crime. So the first clue that the Ebionites were behind this is that it was manipulated to be more consistent. Another clue is there's an emphasis on the supremacy of John the Baptist in the Hebrew Matthew Shem Tov. That's another clue that the Ebionites dipped their filthy paws in it. Another one is John the Baptist is saying that he didn't eat locusts in the Shem Tov or the Hebrew Matthew. It doesn't. John the Baptist is not eating locusts, but rather wafers or manna and honey. Oh, sounds beautiful. But that's just another piece of evidence that they got their filthy paws on it. Because the Ebionites are, they don't believe in eating any kind of meat or anything from any kind of quote unquote living thing, even though all vegetables are living anyway. So they wouldn't really necessarily like the idea of John the Baptist eating locusts. So they would definitely have the predisposition to change the text to say something more spiritual, heavenly, more along the lines of what they think would be better than what the Torah would say. But the Torah does allow for eating of locusts anyway. And seeing that John the Baptist was a Nazirite, locusts are allowed in a Nazirite diet. The Hebrew Matthew also rejects the virgin birth, which is very much in line with the Ebionite way of thinking as well. The Hebrew Matthew Shem Tov displays Jesus as merely just a human prophet, like nothing, like just basically just another human prophet, which again is more like the Ebionite way of thinking. And then we have the Matthew 23 problem, okay? So Matthew 23, I'm constrained by certain restrictions here, what I can say and what I can't say, but in Matthew 23, the context is, listen to the Pharisees, because they sit in Moses' seat, the scribes and the Pharisees, because they sit in Moses' seat. In other words, they have the authority of Moses, basically. Now, I know that you can say there's this literal seat that they had in the synagogues back in those days that they called Moses' seat. That's fine. That's fine and dandy. But they sat in it. The emphasis is on the scribes, plural, and the Pharisees, plural. They sat in that seat. So the Shem Tov version says that we should listen to him, whereas all the other ones say listen to they, like you do everything that they tell you to do and observe. Now this reeks with the Ebionity, if you will, Ebionity. This reeks with the Ebionite cult, because they, of course, they would not want anything to do with the Pharisees. And boy, those bad Pharisees, you would certainly not tell anybody to do and observe what the Pharisees did and observe. So they replaced the they with a he, and it is interpreted by some to mean that they were talking about Moses. Do what Moses tell you to, but that doesn't make any sense. Because why would Yeshua say, why would he put it in the context of the scribes and the Pharisees sitting in Moses' seat? It doesn't make any sense. You got to do some mental gymnastics and theological gymnastics and scriptural manipulation to get it to say that. So this is typical of the Ebionism that we know of. So yes, say here, removing the quote-unquote they from Matthew 23 and replacing it with he, as Ebionites were Pharaophobes, certainly wouldn't want to promote the Pharisees' doctrine. Okay, so wrapping it up here, why do we know that the Hebrew Matthew, especially the Shem Tov, is all about a fraud? How do we know that? Number one, Matthew quoted from Mark word for word. We know that Mark is originally Greek. Mark was the first gospel that was written. Any credible scholar would tell you this. Any credible historian would tell you this. Mark was the first gospel that was written in around 70 AD. Matthew came around in 80 some odd AD, 80, 85 AD. Some believe it was much later than that. And Matthew, and when I say Matthew, I'm talking about the typical the Greek Matthew as it's in almost every Bible today, quoted Mark word for word. We know he copied Mark because we know he came after Mark. And we know that it's not just you can't make a biography of another person, of a person, and have the exact same word phrases and word for word as another biography without some kind of copying. And this is like word for word copying, and it's a common thread throughout Matthew. It's well known that Matthew, the Greek Matthew that we have, was copied word for word from Mark. It wasn't a translation from the Hebrew. Because you cannot take it, it just won't work. Show me, guys. Prove it to me. Write something in English, go and get it translated to Swahili, and then get it translated back to English and have it word for word, all just word for word. Everything's just perfect. It's not going to happen. We know that Matthew used Mark as a template. And we know that he wrote it in Greek. So that's the first piece of evidence that we have. Second, Matthew was written in quality Greek. No evidence of translation. When you have translation, you always have these weird sayings and such, and a lot of time it's not even translated. It's either interpreted or paraphrased rather than translated. But the Matthew that we know of, the canonical Matthew, is written in quality Greek. No evidence of translation. Another one is this: still Aramaic sayings in Matthew. And we went through this just several minutes ago, where we have these Tabitha Kumai and, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, and, all these other things. If you're translating it from Hebrew to Greek, you're not going to translate it like that. It's not how it's translated. That's not how it works. It wouldn't work like that. So we know that the Gospel of Matthew that we have, the canonical Gospel of Matthew that we have, was originally written in Greek because of that. Number 4, first century Hebrew manuscripts of Matthew do not exist. None. Not even a fragment. Not even a word. None. Nothing. In fact, first century, what about second century, third century, fourth century? The oldest one we have here that we know of is the Shem Tov. And that would be like not first century or second century or third century, but 14th century. Another piece of evidence that we have that the Gospel of Matthew as we know it was not originally written in Hebrew, because remember the whole thing boils back to Papias. The whole thing goes back to Papias. Papias didn't say that a gospel was written in Hebrew. He didn't say that the Gospel of Matthew was written in Hebrew. He said that, quote unquote, Matthew, it could have been many Matthews. Let's not assume that it was the same Matthew if Matthew even wrote the Gospel of Matthew. A lot of scholars would say he didn't. Okay? But Papias says that Matthew recorded the sayings, the logia, in Hebrew, which you would expect it to look like the Gospel of Thomas, not like the Gospel of Matthew, and not like Shem Tov. So Papias said sayings, not gospel. Number 6, Matthew quoted from the Greek Septuagint, not the Hebrew. The Greek Matthew quoted from the Greek Septuagint. Now, there are places that it looks like a mix between what we know of as the Masoretic and the Septuagint, and some looks a little bit more like the Masoretic on the Masoretic side. Whatever the case is, we can see evidence in there that the original Matthew that wrote the Gospel of Matthew, as we all know, quoted from the Greek Septuagint. If he wrote it originally in Hebrew, why would he quote? And he can't. That just wouldn't work. Why would he quote from the Greek Septuagint? Number 7, George Howard admitted that it was impure and unreliable. So, a few more minutes here, just a couple minutes, and I'll jump in the live chat with you guys. Is it possible that the Shem Tov preserved some kind of Hebrew Matthew tradition within the text? Is that possible? Yes, it's possible. Is the Shem Tov something we should put our faith in, or, just say, oh, the Shem Tov says it, therefore it's got to be true. Absolutely not. Now, let me clarify what I mean by, is it possible that the Shem Tov could contain some of the traditions, the Hebrew traditions of Matthew? In the same way, it's possible for you to do some dumpster diving and find a gold ring. Okay? You have to dig through a lot of trash, but you might be able to find a gold ring in the dumpster outside. I'll say it again. You might have to, and you will, have to dig through a lot of trash. Is it possible to find the gold ring in the dumpster? It's possible. In the same way, is it possible to find some good nuggets of gold in Shem Tov? It's possible. It's possible. But you have to dig beneath all of the layers of corruption and revision and variance. And you have to dig beneath all of the trash. You got to dig through the trash. At the end of the day, Shem Tov could possibly preserve something. There's no evidence, really, but it's possible. We know for sure that Shem Tov is in a very corrupt form. Now, I know when it comes, I'm going to revisit Matthew 23 here for just a moment. So, some people are so shallow and superficial in their way of thinking. They say, oh, there's no way that Jesus would ever say, listen to the Pharisees. Because, oh, look at, Yeshua, he opposed the Pharisees' traditions in other places of the scripture. I heard that argument as well. And again, I'm thinking, you got to be kidding me. Are you that dull? There could have been, how many traditions would the Pharisees have? So, there could have been, a handful of traditions that the Pharisees engaged in. And we know through the Gospels that Yeshua opposed some of these, or at least a few of these. But out of the thousands, we know that he opposed a few of them. But taking it all into context, when he says, listen to the scribes and Pharisees, do what they do, or do what they say, but not what they do. Of course, that means do what they say in the context of, okay, we know that there are a few things here that they get off, they get wrong, because in a few ways they put the traditions of men over the actual commandment of God. Okay, that's clear, and that's understood. To see some of these guys talk like they know what they're doing, talk like they know what they're talking about, and say, oh yeah, there's no way that Jesus could have said what the Greek Matthew says in Matthew 23, because he opposed the Pharisees in a few other points. I'm thinking, buddy, what's wrong? What, you can't walk and chew gum at the same time? You can't put the two together? I think about this. It's like the idea, and I know the Ebionites also use this argument, saying, well, that God is opposed to animal sacrifices. The Ebionites use this argument. God is opposed to animal sacrifices, and we know that because, well, you see in Amos chapter 5 and Isaiah, and then we see a few things in the New Testament where it talks about this, and I desire mercy, not sacrifice, yada, yada, yada. But they don't see the big picture. It's like they're the field of their thought and their understanding and their theology is so, they can look through a keyhole with both eyes. It's like, why would God say, I reject your sacrifices in Amos chapter 5, or in Isaiah, or in Jeremiah, or in other parts of Scripture? Why would he say that? Well, look at the entirety of the big picture. He makes it very clear why he says that. Because these people are using the sacrifices as a commodity, not as a honest, heartfelt expression and prophetic action of the repentance that they have supposed to have done. In other words, they are treating the sacrifices as if they just pay for their sin and then they go off and sin like the devil for the rest of the time. Of course, God's not happy with that. Of course, that's not what God wants. The best way to look at it is like, say we have a couple. We have a husband and a wife. The husband tells the wife, you know what I love? I love it when you cook me. I love it when you barbecue steaks. Those T-bone steaks, and I love it when you saute it with mushrooms, and that's what I love it. That's what I want from you. I'm asking, whenever we can you do that for me? Yeah, that's what pleases me. And then, as time goes on, the wife is unfaithful. The wife starts committing adultery. She's out night after night. The husband knows what's going on. One night she comes home at 3:00 in the morning. The husband knows where she was. And the husband meets her at the door and says, I know what you're doing. I know where you've been. I am really, really angry with you right now. I'm really angry with you. And the wife says, here's the steak. Here's the steak with the sauteed mushrooms. You know what that husband's probably going to do? He's probably going to take that steak and throw it on the floor or throw it in the garbage. And that wife, if that wife is as stupid as some of these nimnus that you see and hear, the wife would say, oh, but honey, you said what pleases you is steak. You know what he would say? I don't want your stinking steak. I want you to be faithful. Right? That's exactly what God did with the sacrifices. Yes, he ordered the sacrifices. Yes, that's what he wanted. Yes, that's what pleased him. But it has to be in the right context, in the right way. It has to be in the right setting. In the same way, when this wife comes home and the husband knows what's going on and he's just fuming, she can't say, oh, but honey, here's a steak now. He's not going to accept that. In the same way, God's not going to accept the sacrifice. He's going to say, enough with your stinking sacrifice. It's just a stench to me. That's not what I want. Oh, but Lord, you said that. Like, don't be so incredibly, I'm not even going to use the word. So in the same way, when Yeshua said, okay, there are a few traditions that the Pharisees are doing that are nullifying the word of God. And he also said, listen to the Pharisees and do and observe all that they tell you to do. Of course, we can't be so fickle-minded and so narrow-minded that we think, oh, wait a second, it's got to be one or the other. Like, give me a break. It's obvious. Yeah, out of the 5,000 traditions that you guys do, a couple of them are, you need to forget them. But the other ones, do them. In fact, Acts chapter 21, we have James rebuking Paul or confronting Paul. Is it true that you're telling people not to obey the customs of the Jews? Of course, that's talking about the customs of the Pharisees, the traditions of the fathers. Of course. So don't let anybody bamboozle you into thinking that we have the original Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew, or even in Greek for that matter. No, we don't. We have a whole lot more Greek, and we have a whole lot more to work with. We can do a whole lot more of textual criticism and getting to the actual original document, at least discerning what it could have said. Not that we have the original, but rather what maybe it could have said, and what discerning, the different phrases in the history of the book, of the text. Yeah, we have 1,000 times more, actually more than 1,000 times more, probably 10,000 times more Greek than we have Hebrew. In fact, we don't have any Hebrew as far as I understand. No Hebrew manuscripts whatsoever. Please present to me a legit, bona fide Hebrew manuscript of the Gospel of Matthew from the first few centuries. Please present it to me. You can't present it to me, then don't claim that you have it. Don't claim that you have an original Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew. It does not exist. Does not exist. And anybody that would produce anything from Shem Tov manuscripts, you better be very careful. You better take it with a grain of salt. You better know your textual criticism inside and out, and your critical thinking skills inside and out. You better be a genius in your hermeneutical and theological skills, and your scriptural forensics. You have to be pretty good with that in order to really handle that particular text the way it should be handled. Don't believe anybody who says, oh yeah, this is what the Shem Tov says. Okay, well, the Shem Tov says that. That should be 1,000 red flags right there. Maybe somewheres within all of the trash, maybe you might find a gold ring, maybe. But it better line up with what we already know. It better line up with the Torah and the prophets as we already know. I heard a couple guys on a video who was arguing that the Greek Matthew must be wrong because it contradicted the main thought of Pharisees and such. That's completely backwards. That's completely backwards to the truth. Here's the truth, folks. Any scholar worth the powder to blow him up, any scholar that is worth even listening to a word that he says, will tell you that verses like Matthew 23 verses 1 to 3, or Matthew 25, the parable of the sheep and the goats, or Matthew 7 verses 21 to 23, any of these kind of verses like that, because it is going against the grain, that's the reason why we know it's true. That's the reason why we know it is historical. Why? Because the likelihood of a Christian writing that down without it being objectively true is next to nil if it goes against the grain. It's like that. It's very much like the criteria of embarrassment. When you say something seemingly against yourself, that's even more reason to believe it. If you call the police and say Jimmy committed crime X, horrible crime, Jimmy did it, the police is not going to go arrest Jimmy right away. The police will investigate. They're not going to just go throw handcuffs on Jimmy. They're going to go investigate first. And then if they have evidence to, then they will arrest him. But if Jimmy himself goes to the police and says, I have committed this horrible crime, crime X, you know what's going to happen? They're going to throw him in cuffs and throw him in jail right away. Why? For the same reason. When you say something that seemingly contradicts yourself, that's even more reason to believe it. It's more likely to be true. Matthew 25, the parable of the sheep and the goats, is more likely to be historical as opposed to any of the other stuff because it goes against the Pauline narrative, because it goes against all of the Christianity of the day. Same with the passage of Matthew chapter 23, the first few verses, how Yeshua said, obey the Pharisees and the scribes. That's more likely to be true. But these Nimnus have got it completely backwards. They think it's more likely to be true when you got this fraudster that takes this text, makes it into a comparable Hebrew text, and changes the code, changes everything, manipulates it, and lies to you, and makes it more consistent. No, that's not what we want. We want more truth. That's what we want. Just because someone changed the text to make it more consistent with their shallow way of thinking doesn't mean it's original. Someone say, well, the Hebrew fixes all these problems. That's the reason why you shouldn't believe it. That's the reason, that's the greatest sign that it's not original. I mean, I think that out of all the Gospels, the Gospel of John is probably the worst. Second to that would be Mark. I can take Mark and, I wouldn't do it, but I could take Mark and I can make it into a Hebrew Mark or whatever the case, or whatever. I can redo it and change and fix up and, fix up the contradictions and somehow present it as, this is original. Are you going to believe it? Are you going to believe that that's original because it fixes up all the contradictions? You better not. You better not. Anyone can forge an ancient document to make it sound more consistent. That's the whole idea. Matthew took Mark and fixing up some of the, like Matthew, writing it in Greek, took Mark and copied not only word for word in Greek, but also copied the Greek Septuagint and also fixed up what the mistakes that Mark made and added to it and made it more bombastic and such. And then Luke comes around and he took Mark and the other sources that he had and he made it more accurate, as he himself said. Excuse me. So typically the progression, the chronological sequence of events in the text is you start with a raw form that's not pure. Well, I shouldn't say not pure. It's purely original, but it's not. It's got lots of rough edges. It's got lots of problems. And then you got someone coming around attempting to fix it up and someone else attempting to fix up and then that's how you get all these corruptions too. So you get corruptions upon corruptions. The best thing to do is go back to the original, accept it for what it really is, call it what it really is, and be blessed. If quote unquote Mark wrote it in a bad way, I'm not going to try to fix it up. I'm not going to try to fix it up. I'm going to say, hey, Mark is Mark. Mark is Mark. And these are the good things about Mark. These are the bad things about Mark. You just got to leave it the way it is. I don't want to touch it. I don't want to corrupt it. I don't want to mess with it. So it all started back at Papias. And still to this very day, after almost 2,000 years, we still have some of the smartest brains in the world debating and arguing over what exactly Papias meant. Matthew wrote the Logia, the sayings, in Hebrew. What exactly, in the Hebrew dialect, what exactly does he mean? He embedded it within the Greek, or he wrote it in a completely different Hebrew text. Irenaeus, did he copy Papias? Did Tertullian copy Irenaeus, who copied Papias? Just down the line. Just like one parrot parroting the other parrot, which parrots the other parrot, and it gets more and more elaborate as you go along until finally somebody says, hey, great idea. I think we'll make a Hebrew Matthew. Okay, guys, I'll be jumping in the live chat with you guys, and we'll see what we got, and we'll wrap it up here shortly. Matthew on TikTok, welcome, blessings. First century Christian, Seathart, Paul, Chelsea, welcome, voice of one, blessings multiplied to you. John, good to see you, blessings to you and yours. Iron Sharp, Nikuki, welcome. Danella, welcome. Cyprus, welcome, blessings. Jordan, Mac, up North Star, Edna, Sanela, Okik, Ruben, Eric, Cybernet Ninja, welcome back. Good to see you. Lady J, Sandy's, Savage, Saucy, Yamaha Guy, Cheryl, welcome, guys. Wendell, user 51, user 15, user 24, Terrence, Max, Severed Hype, Savage, welcome. Stephanie says, shalom, shalom, Stephanie, welcome and blessings to you and yours. Peowete says, who's Papias? Yeah, Papias is one of the early church fathers that lived around the turn of the 2nd century, and what he wrote there was written around 130, they figure, around 130 AD. Going Nora says, I'm sorry for bringing up the Greek thing, Chris. I hope you understand. I wasn't arguing with you. Yeah, no problem, Going Nora. I didn't get that at all. Thank you. JR says, do we have anything from the other bishops of Jerusalem? If you mean anything Hebrew, the answer would be no, as far as I understand. JR said, or possibly earlier manuscripts were deliberately destroyed by Rufinus, who edited early texts to add Trinitarian references after the councils in the 4th century. Well, you know, here's the thing. You can have, we can make up anything, right? We can make up anything and then say, well, it was destroyed. See, I'm not here to tear anyone down, but by name, but there is this particular gentleman who claims to have found a lot of things, archaeologically speaking, and when they ask him about it, it's lost, or they took it from me, or whatever the case is. Well, I don't think if God wants you to, I think God is able to preserve the truth with evidence, So see, in the scriptures, the things that were destroyed were the things that were bad, right? I mean, completely destroyed anyway, right? So you got like in Noah's day, you got the Tower of Babel. The things that were completely destroyed were the things that God wanted completely destroyed. Like the Pastafarians. I mean, they can make up anything about the great spaghetti god in the sky, and they can say, well, so and so destroyed it all the holy manuscripts in such and such a year. Am I supposed to believe that? Where's the evidence? And if it's true, and if it's something that God wants us to know and have, why was it all destroyed? That would be my question. Let's finish. It says, when Matthew quotes from the Old Testament, is it in line with the Greek or Masoretic Hebrew Old Testament? Very good question, Matthew, or excuse me, not Matthew. Let's finish it. In most ways, as I understand, it's in line with the Greek. Now, there are some things that he quotes there that seems to be a mixture between the Greek and the Hebrew. Maybe, I don't know, maybe one of these days, maybe another Sunday, we'll do another live stream, taking each gospel one at a time and taking all the quotes and bouncing it off of the different manuscripts, the Aramaic, the Peshitta, the Samaritan, the Masoretic, and all the other ones, all these other ones that the Dead Sea Scrolls. Take a look at it and see what lines up the most. And this is a thing here as well, and we got to keep this in mind as well. I know there are people who are trying to reconstruct a text using quotes instead of using the actual text. You could do that, but there will be absolute corruption. It will not be perfect. It will not be all that clear because you're downstream, right? So you're going to be, it's like a hearsay. It's like, well, he said that said that, quote, this is what it said. But if you check out the New Testament quotes of the Old Testament, you'll find that almost every time it's not accurate. It's not accurate. And sometimes, actually many times, it's not accurate with either the Septuagint or with the Masoretic. It's like from some other manuscript, and we don't know what it's from. The point is this. It's either one of two things. It's either the authors of the New Testament texts are not accurate in their quotes, which it very well could very well be, or they are accurate, but they're quoting a text that we don't have anymore. A manuscript family that we don't have anymore. Payawedi says the tradition we made up, obviously. I think what you're referring to there is the tradition. Let me see if we can go back there to what was it, Tertullian. Tertullian, he was saying that I think this is what you're talking about there, Payawedi. The last point here in this, where Tertullian said, among the four Gospels, which are the only indisputable ones in the Church of God under heaven, I have learned by tradition. So what does that mean? Learned through the grapevine? It was passed down from one to another to another. Again, this is very conducive to corruption. You know, even all of I do believe that all of us, even as we are firsthand witnesses of many things, our memories can be quite off. I have experienced this myself many times, and I suspect that we all do because reading some of the writings of a lot of psychologists would say that the memories of a lot of people are off. Uh, Give me a second, guys. I hear something outside here. Hold on a second, guys. Thanks for your patience, guys. Just want to make sure that everything's good there outside. Every once in a while, I hear some strange, wild animal kind of things going on out there. So, anyways, all right. Yeah. So back to the live chat. Thank you guys for your patience. Appreciate that. Hello, Angela, Mike, D Stu 2023. JR says there's also the basis of Gnosticism, if I'm not mistaken. The Hebrew version has El Eli Azavtani instead of probably expected Lama Azavtami. Right. Yeah. Thank you, JR. Sorry, guys, I'm not able to get to all of the. If you have something that I'll try to get to as much as possible here across all the different platforms, but if there's something really pressing on your heart or mind right now, just tag me in the live chat at Christopher. JR says, very true. The longer the text goes, the more likely marginal notes are made it into the text, like 1 John 5 referring to the Trinity. Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree with that there, JR. Best I can find. Kochin is the Hebrew. Kokin. JR says, believe it if it conforms to what is revealed in the Old Testament. If not, then we should suspect it. That's how I try to look at it. Yeah, exactly. That's how I look at it as well. Although I am aware that the Torah itself does make room for, and we have to, because we have some people out there that are like sola scriptura. We have the sola scriptura people in Christians. Some of them are like that, right? Or they're like super. It's like if it's in the Bible, I believe it. If it's not in the Bible, I don't believe it. What they really mean is if it's in here, and if I interpret it that way, then I believe it. That's what they mean. We also have that kind of same mindset with the Karaite Jews as well. It's almost like the sola scriptura version of the Jews. So the thing is You can't interpret the Torah without extra biblical sources. You can't even read the Torah without extra biblical sources. You must be taught, and that means you have to be taught from an extra biblical source, right? So you can't even read the Torah unless you learn how to read the language that it's written in. If you're learning the original Hebrew, well, I shouldn't say original, you know what I'm saying. If you're learning the Hebrew version of it, the Masoretic text, or whatever the case is, or this Greek Septuagint, or the English translations involved, you still have to learn, you still have to get educated in reading and comprehending that particular language. And in so doing that, that kind of teaching will instill in you a way of interpretation, which could possibly be erroneous in the light of ancient literary works. Because words, phrases, figures of speech lose their meaning pretty fast, change their meaning pretty fast. So in many ways, we have to look beyond the written text to other sources in order to interpret it right. Like, how many times we're going through the Torah right now in in our, at least our nightly weeknights. We've been through Genesis, all the way through Genesis. We've been all the way through Exodus. We're in the middle of Leviticus right now. And you know how many times it says, as God had instructed Moses. It says this a lot. Do this as the Lord instructed Moses. Do this as the Lord instructed Moses. But then you go, okay, where did God instruct Moses this? And it's not there. So that's where the oral Torah comes in. So the written text is obviously incomplete, because we see this a lot. We see this quite often, and I pointed it out several times where it's like, slaughter the animal as the Lord had instructed Moses. Well, where? It's not there. We don't have the details there. Many things like that. The whole thing about interpretation and translation of the text, right? We got for example, milk and fat, the exact same Hebrew word. So how do you know when it's to be translated milk, and how do you know when it's to be translated fat? In many cases, just looking at the text in and of itself, just the Torah, there's no way to tell. There's no way to tell. It can be translated either way. So the Bible translators, they translate it as per Talmud. They have to look outside the text in order to understand what does this word actually mean in its context and in the culture. I mean, it can mean this or something completely different. The same word for Hebrew and for fat is the same word for milk. So is it fat? Is it fat and honey? Which that might make sense, because you got the carbs, and you got the more of the protein in the oils, right? So you got the carbs and the oils. Or is it milk and honey? Why would it be milk and honey? If you really think about it, honey is like the super sweet, right? And the fat would be, that's the other side of the dietary spectrum in regards to the caloric value, the energy value. So you got the two roots there of dietary energy, one from the carbs, another one from the oils or the proteins. But which is it? Is it fat, which seems to make more sense scientifically speaking, or is it milk? Well, they go by milk. Why is that? Tradition. What tradition? Talmud. Same for the book of Acts, where it says, we went a Sabbath day's journey. Well, you don't know how to interpret that. You don't know what a Sabbath day's journey is. It doesn't tell you in the scriptures what a Sabbath day's journey is. So you will not know. You do not know. It's impossible for you to know how to interpret the Bible without the Talmud, because it's not in there. It doesn't tell you what a Sabbath day's journey is. But if you look in the Talmud, it tells you. So that's how you can get a lot more out of the scriptures. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that the Talmud is the be-all, end-all perfection. No way. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying it is a source of information. You know, a lot of people say, well, you know, everything's in the written Torah. Everything, or if you need to know something, just look in the Bible or just pray. But if you look in the Bible, Deuteronomy chapter 17, what does it tell you to do with controversial issues? It tells you, it doesn't say look in the Bible. It doesn't say pray about it. It doesn't say ask the Lord. It says go to the men, go to the Levites or the priests or the judges that have been put in place, and they will tell you. They will settle the issue for you. They will give you the answer to this controversy that you're in. You know, so it does point out. It does point outward and outside of the Torah. Now, I don't know. I can't say for sure, and I've never claimed to know for sure what actual part of what Jewish persuasion Yeshua actually was. Some people think that he was just nothing. I don't think so. He had to be slotted in somewhere, especially when we have evidence that he frequented the synagogues, he frequented the temple. You know, he had to go in, he had to slot in somewhere, because they just wouldn't let people get up and, you know, they wouldn't let someone get up in the synagogue and teach or preach. People, somebody who's just some hippie off the street that's not really associated or not really associated with any certified group or trusted, you know, and known. I don't think it doesn't seem like he was part of the Sadducees. Because the Sadducees only believe in written Torah. They're like the Sola Scriptura. They're like the Karaites of today, the Sadducees. They only believe in the written Torah. That's all they believe in. That's it. They don't even believe in they don't even go by the prophets. But the Pharisees did go by the prophets. Was Yeshua an Essene? Probably not. Was he an Ebionite? For sure not. So what does that leave? What does that leave us with? We know that the Parashim, that the Pharisees, were exclusive people. They would not be hanging around with, they would not be rubbing shoulders with people that were not of their caliber. They would not do that. They certainly were not buddies and chummy with the Sadducees or the Essenes or anything like that. Actually, the Essenes are not even mentioned there at all. So we know that the Pharisees were very exclusive, that they only hung around their own. And Yeshua was around them all, much of the time. Not only that, but they invited him to their place. Luke chapter 11 is a good example of that, and other places as well, where the Pharisees invited Yeshua to their own home. And he went. He went. So if he was a Pharisee, then that would give him more right to speak against the questionable some of the questionable practices of the Pharisees. He certainly did speak against their practices, but he didn't really speak against their doctrine per se. I know one of the Gospels, which one is it now? It said that the yeast of the Pharisees is the yeast is the doctrine of the Pharisees, which I do not believe that is correct at all. Yeast is a symbol of pride and hypocrisy, which is talking about not the doctrine of the Pharisees, but rather the action of the Pharisees. So I'm not making a claim. I'm not making a matter of fact kind of claim like I know that I know, but it seems to me like if he was part of any kind of group, it would have been more likely. It would have been more likely the Pharisees. Paul himself was a proud Pharisee all the way, right? And in Acts chapter 15, the first council of the church involved the Pharisees. They were there. So Peter and James, the main man, James the just, he was there. It was the first great council of the church. The Pharisees were present. Why would they be present? It says that they were the believing Pharisees, which I assume means that they were part of they were the Pharisees that believed that Yeshua was the Messiah. So they were part of the church. They were part of the white-hot New Testament, Bible church. So there's nothing wrong with being a Pharisee. There is something wrong about being a hypocrite, though. We got Nicodemus that was a Pharisee. If Yeshua was a Pharisee, that would give him more right and more power. That would make sense. Okay, yeah. So he was a Pharisee. So that would give him the position of authority to speak against it, to speak against some of the stuff. Like, for example, if I was never in the church realm, or if I did, but trust me, I did. I spoke against some of the stuff that the church was involved in, even the churches that I attended. I met with the pastor. I met with the senior leaders, and I spoke against it. How can I do that? Because I was a part of that church. If I wasn't a part of that church, I'd be just a stranger off the street. Like, why would I'd have no place to say anything. But seeing that I was part of their church, I was a member there. I could speak to it. I had the place and authority to say, hey, Pastor so-and-so, here's the problem here. Here's the beef, And trust me, I did that a few times, okay? So, yeah, I just can't walk in off the street off of, in the same way, why not, Yeshua? Thank you, JR. Let's finish. It says, it is important to stay him and bold in the ways of Yud-He. I think you mean Yud-He Wah-He. Luke 14:11, for all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all those who humble themselves will be exalted. Humble, not him. Autocorrect is bugging me lately. Okay. Thank you. JR says it's definitely a different textual tradition, but definitely not the original version of Matthew. As well said. Well, thank you, JR. JR says, true, just like the Greek doesn't reflect the original Matthew with the Trinitarian formula being added in. Jeconiah instead of Jehoiakim. So in that regard, JR, what I would be doing is I'd be looking at the earliest of the Greek manuscripts, because this is what we've seen, and you mentioned it earlier, 1 John chapter 5, where the earliest of the Greek manuscripts do not have the Trinitarian thing in there. So in both of those, cases, I'd be looking at the earliest of the Greek manuscripts to see if that's in there. Because again, anybody can just take that and say, okay, yeah, I'll just run away with the runaway rumor of Papias and just make my own Hebrew Matthew and proclaim that it's the original true one. And I'll just fix everything up. I'll just fix up Jeconiah. I'll just fix up the other thing. I'll fix everything up. And then I can get people to believe that it's actually original. So it's super important to look into the actual historical documents. What did the earliest manuscripts have to say? Especially if we can go back to the 1st century, all the better. 2nd century, well, if we don't have the 1st century, then we'll go for the 2nd. The earliest ones, no matter what. That way we can tell. Is it possible that Matthew made mistakes? Oh yeah. Did he make mistakes in the absolute original? I'm very, very, very convinced he did. I'm very, very convinced he did. The whole 14 thing, I don't care whether it's Greek or Hebrew, it is nonsense. Compared to Luke, Luke has an extra 15 generations. And then you got to go back to the original, not the original, you know what I mean? You go back to the, let's say the Tanakh, and you look at what we have there. We did that in our Matthew series, so we went back in that, and we, I think beyond a reasonable doubt, we have proven that the original, as far as we can tell, Matthew himself wrote his gospel in a way that was not so historical. He didn't write it to be legally, literally, and historically correct. He didn't write it to be like that. He wrote it to be more of an theological impacts, memorable stories for the purpose of teaching theology or morals. JR says that happens with text though. You have a version and it's different, and so you try to quote unquote fix it so it matches the other versions you see in the other languages. Reasonable thing to happen with copyists. Yeah, see that. I don't think that anybody should do that. I think that's how we get all the variants. That's how we get all the corruption. That's how we get all the confusion. What we should have did. We should have just taken the original and left it as it is, with all of its quirks, with all of its contradictions, with all of its problems, with all of its mistakes, left it that way. Because once you start trying to fix it, then you have the biases coming in. Then you have, again, this is giving a platform for pride. It's like, well, I know what it really was supposed to say. Well, really, you really know what it really is supposed to say? How do you know? Well, I know how it's really supposed to be interpreted. Really? Oh, fix it. No, you shouldn't fix it. Don't even touch it. Get your paws off of it. If Matthew or Mark or Luke or John, I'm sure that there are many contradictions in there. Many contradictions in there. God, one thing I've learned about God is that he loves to work through fallible men. He loves to work through fallible men. In spite of our imperfections, in spite of our mistakes, in spite of our perhaps even sins, God forbid, God can still work through us. God can still speak through us. He's not looking, there's this old revivalist that would always say, God is not looking for silver vessels. God is not looking for golden vessels. He's looking for yielded vessels. Because there are no perfect. Are there any perfect prophets? Are there any perfect Pharisees? Are there any perfect scribes? Are there any perfect people who transmit the text? Are there any perfect authors of any of the books of Holy Scripture? I don't believe so. I think that God, even the original, forget about Matthew, whoever wrote that gospel, even let's say Isaiah himself, did he write it absolutely extremely perfect? I doubt it. I mean, humans are humans, and God does not make robots out of people. We make mistakes all the time. We make mistakes all the time. You know, even the greatest of all the greatest, even Moses made mistakes. And yes, I believe that Yeshua did too. I know that that goes against the grain of a lot of people, what a lot of people think. But hey, he was. Look at how a lot of people looked at Yeshua. Look at how his family looked at him. Look at how his friends looked at him. Those who really knew him. What did they say in Mark chapter 3? He's crazy. He lost his mind. We know who he is. So if he was perfect, if he was the golden vessel, don't you think they would say, oh man, yeah, this guy always was just the perfect guy. But they didn't see that at all. Right? So humans are humans. So even the original, the very fact that God would use this corruptible human body and use corruptible writing pens with corruptible ink on a corruptible medium would tell you that the whole platform is corruptible. The whole thing, even the original, whatever the original Hebrew, Matthew or whatever it is, whatever it was, I wouldn't expect it to be perfect. In fact, even if the Hebrew Matthew is half true, Matthew, the original Matthew, is still far from perfect. Far from it. Far from it. There's a lot wrong with the Gospel of Matthew. There's a lot of good stuff in there too. A lot of good stuff, but there's a lot wrong with it. JR says, have you seen the Syriac Sinaiticus? I understand this would be the Codex Sinaiticus. Yeah, yes, I can't say I read every single word of it, but I am aware of that. I am aware of that. Thank you, JR. Dahlia says, I've come in late. What does this mean? Dahlia, check out the whole entire video from the beginning. Lots to absorb there. JR says, short version, Shem Tov is not an original first century text. Well, yeah, there's no evidence to even suggest that. And I wouldn't come right out and say, like, there's a lot of evidence that it was, there's lots of corruption in it, for sure. Lots and lots of corruption. Nothing that you could put your really trust in unless you are very well familiar with textual criticism and you know how to piece through all the trash. Then, you know, again, is it possible that you could find original Hebrew from the first century embedded into the Shem Tov? Yeah, like I said, it's possible that you can find a golden ring in the dumpster outside as well. JR says, and Dutele appears to be either a copy or based on the same source text. Well, you know, the people who believe in the Dutele would tell you that the Shem Tov is the copy, and the Dutele is on par with the Greek, where they typically believe that deutele is actually a translation of the Greek. So the Greek was written first, and then deutele came after that. Funny. JR says the funny thing is my church has an Aunt Jane who used to work with our youth group. All right, well there you go. I didn't know that. So JR says phrasing it that way makes more sense. So still doubtful for the GATH. Yeah, they are vegetarians. God never said don't eat meat. That's true. Yeah. Deuteronomy 12:20 says we can eat meat. I agree. Yes. The Ebionites don't believe in, for those of you who don't know, the Ebionites do not eat meat at all. And so they're the ones that say, oh, well, the scribes messed up the text, and, it was only for the Pharisees to make money to bring the sacrifices into the temple. God didn't want the sacrifices to begin with. Like, so many different claims. That's a very good example of the proof by assertion fallacy. The Ebionites are making all these assertions, all these claims, but where's the evidence behind it? Like, really? And this is what I said. There's a couple people I remember in the past there that were identified with the Ebionite kind of way of thinking. And I asked them, like, okay, so you're saying that the Torah has been corrupted and it's been messed around by the Pharisees, because the Ebionites hate the Pharisees. So there's no wonder why, if the Ebionites are behind the Shem Tov, that they took out the they and they added it with he, because they hate the Pharisees. So they're like, oh yeah, the Pharisees, they're the ones that corrupted the text. The scribes and the Pharisees, they're the ones that put in the animal sacrifices. God never wanted that. Okay, where's your evidence? Like, do you have, like, is it in the Dead Sea Scrolls? Or do we have another text, the Samaritan text, that you can say, oh, look, I have an actual text dating way back to the 1st century or BC, whatever the case is, that proves that this text predates the other text and it doesn't have the animal sacrifices in it. If they can produce that evidence, then hey, I think that they got a really good argument. But as far as I know, they can't produce it. All they have is just a claim. All they have is just, well, you can't really, I'm not going to buy it. I'm not going to believe it unless I see the evidence. Thank you, JR. And Clifton says, blessings. Blessings, Clifton. Welcome. Clifton says, any thoughts on Acura Mazda? Well, Clifton, we're on a topic here tonight of the Hebrew Matthew, and especially Shem Tov. So I really can't comment on Acura or Mazda or anything like that, Clifton. Sorry. Ophiz says, shalom, shalom. Shalom, shalom, Ophiz. Welcome and blessings. JR says, reminds me of Twisted Translations channel. Twisted Translations channel uses Google Translate to make really funny versions of pop songs. You know what that reminds me of, JR? I used to, several years ago, before they had like speech recognition, that was really good. Several years ago, I used to have lots of fun with speech recognition, like or speech to text. And, when all else fails, and that was like several years ago now, and now it's a lot better. But when all else failed, what I used to do is just pull up the speech to text and just say something about somebody that I know, or just mention someone's name and just go on for a minute or two, and then see what the actual text was. It was like really, really funny stuff, especially some of the names that are uncommon names and names of people from other countries as well, and you start mentioning these names, and it's really, really funny. Yeah, JR says the oldest Gospels I know of are the Syriac Sinaiticus. Yes, or the Codex Sinaiticus. Yes. Yes, very interesting text, by the way, with the inclusion of the Shepherd of Hermas and the Epistle of Barnabas. I'm not one for Bible canon, no matter which way you look at it, but hey, you got to give it for the Codex Sinaiticus, including those other books in there. JR, the ritual hand washing was one of them he opposed. That'd be pretty meaningless sacrifice. Yeah, so we should follow the Talmud when it doesn't contradict the OT. Well, I'm not going to say, like, quote unquote follow the Talmud. What I am saying is that the Talmud has information in it that would help us to understand and interpret a lot of what the scriptures have to say. Again, I'm not saying that it's perfect. I don't think it is perfect. I don't think it's perfect. But at the same time, the Talmud is a library. So to me, I look at it like this. It's like any other library. But maybe I shouldn't. I think the Talmud would be better than just a secular library. But even a secular library, I'm not going to say just throw out every book in the secular library because, even if half of it is nonsense. Well, even if half of it is nonsense, you might have another, 100,000 books in there that would really be awesome stuff, like to really gain a lot of knowledge and really go further. So, yeah, the Talmud is just a library. Matthew says the Talmud is an owner's manual. Yeah. So, again, like you think about it, the written Torah does say a lot of things and alludes to things that's not actually there. And I think that some of these people, I don't know how, I can imagine what the Karaites and some of these other people would say to get around it. I mean, they have to get around it somehow. But really, all things considered, there's a lot in the written Torah that's very ambiguous and not informative, especially the first few chapters of Genesis. And then again, over and over again, especially in Leviticus, it's like, as the Lord commanded Moses, as the Lord commanded Moses, it's like, where did the Lord command Moses this? Like, you're supposed to do this in accordance with the words that God gave to Moses. Well, where is it? It's not there. It's not in the written Torah. So we have only one choice, and that is going outside of the written Torah to find more information about what the Lord actually did command Moses. Now, then again, we're subject to the telephone game where it's like, oh man, it's like 3,500 years ago. Who knows of how much of this is accurate? But but then again, that gets into more of a forensic scriptural study, because then we have to say, okay, let's see, what's the earliest manuscripts we can find, or the earliest sources of this information we can find, and then compare them all, and then use some good textual criticism and extract the truth out of it as much as possible, if it's possible. So I think it's it's really fun. It's really fun, really. Anyways, guys, we're going to wrap it up here. Tomorrow we'll be back at it. Leviticus chapter 14. We're going to continue with Leviticus chapter 14 tomorrow. And let me see here. What is it? Tomorrow's Monday. Okay. Yeah. So we'll pick up there and we'll talk about that. Great fellowship as always. All right, guys. So keep on calling on him. Keep on calling on him, and he will show you great and mighty things, things that you don't know. Jeremiah 33:3. Matthew says, ever read the Baal Shem Tov? What are you referring to? What we're talking about? Yeah, all right. Yeah, okay. So Jewish healer. Okay. Yeah, I'm not very familiar. It sounds like something that I heard about before. Baal Shem Tov, Jewish healer. Yeah. Thank you for asking there, Matthew. I appreciate that. So tomorrow we'll be back, same time, same place, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and we'll continue with reading from Leviticus, discussing that, and again, who knows what we're going to come across there in Leviticus, and we got lots to talk about, lots of stuff to learn. All right, so appreciate you guys. You guys are amazing. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your comments and your questions. Share the live stream if this means anything to you, and you think there's anybody out there that would benefit from anything that we shared here today. All right, guys. Appreciate you guys. Love you guys. As always, I pray the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face to shine upon you, lift up his countenance upon you, and give you wonderful, wonderful shalom. Amen. Amen. We'll see you guys tomorrow.